It gives us just a taste of how this race is going to play out, and apparently it's going to be ugly. Oregon newspapers hosted the debate between incumbent Ted Kulongoski and Republican Ron Saxton. The candidates labeled one another early on, throwing heated accusations. Kulongoski accused Saxton of being a tool of corporate interests. Saxton described Kulongoski as a do-nothing governor.
Ron Saxton believes that governors should represent oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, big car companies, payday lenders, and the very wealthiest few.
4 years later, you would be hard-pressed to find a legislator of either party who believes the governor has been a constructive partner in the legislative process.
It's increasing.
The debate did draw some protest, with the 4 third-party candidates furious at not being included in that debate. And those third-party candidates got the last word on the first day of Oregon's governor debates. We sent KT reporter Ed Teach out to hear how they plan on beating the odds and becoming the state's next governor. Ed?
Well, Deb, all campaign statistics show third-party candidates don't stand a chance when it comes to winning. But what they do best is perhaps just what Oregon voters want. So we chatted with what KEX radio host Mark Mason calls the candidates left out on the first day of debates for Oregon's next governor.
Three guests. They are the candidates that were left out of today's very first gubernatorial debate up in Welch's.
No pun intended, but from the get-go, Oregon's minor party candidates weren't seated correctly. Politically speaking, Mary Starrett is on the far right, but Joe Keating should be on the far left, not the middle, where Richard Morley should sit. On the issues, here's where they stand, or sit.
The real issue is, what do we fund first? And our campaign says you fund the highest priorities first, and those priorities are public safety and education.
We need to get politicians out of the mix, start listening to the common sense of the guy on the street.
We're calling it our cha-ching plan. Once we find something that's going to be a net revenue producer for the state, it goes in a high priority as a cha-ching.
And make no mistake, I think some of these folks get up in the morning and they say, look in the mirror and they see Oregon's next governor there.
K2 political analyst Tim Hibbett says minor party candidates don't stand a chance of being Oregon's next governor.
Each one of them seem to think they really have a chance. Do they?
Well, no, in a word.
But don't tell that to minor party candidates about them being a waste of the public's time.
You don't have much of a chance.
No, that's not a waste, Ed. The waste is when you vote for somebody you really don't believe in.
Did you not get enough attention as a kid? Why would you want to run for a race you don't have a chance, as far as statistically, to win?
Anybody who's ever run a campaign knows it's not fun, it's hard work, it can be grueling, it can be very punishing, it has nothing to do with attention. If you want attention, you go do something like become a consumer reporter.
Well, it's not an ego trip that you're after.
No, I'm here solely, all right, to do whatever I can to make the state a better state.
Which shows these minor party candidates are not clowning around like Extremo the Clown did in the 2004 Portland mayoral race.
Ironically, the minor party candidate with the best chance of getting the most votes in November wasn't invited to either debate. Independent candidate Ben Westland has not turned in the needed signatures to put him on the ballot yet. So technically, he's not a candidate yet.
And political analysts may not think that they have a chance at winning the overall election, but they certainly have a chance of taking away people's votes.
That's right. They can spoil the election. And remember, there were a few guys like Minnesota's governor. You know, he was a minor party candidate. Jesse Ventura.
That's right.
He won, and, well, yeah. Anyway,
you never know.
Never know.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, so this story brings us to our web poll question of the day. If the election for Oregon's governor is held today or tomorrow, who would you vote for?
Heats up. The 3 minor party candidates are now fighting mad that they've been excluded from the debates. Mary Starrett, Joe Keating, and Richard Morley held a press conference downtown Portland today to demand that they be allowed to debate Republican Ron Saxton and Democrat Ted Kulongoski. They say excluding them from those debates means most Oregonians won't learn their positions on important issues, and the 3 say that shortchanges the entire democratic process.
To exclude the 3 minor party candidates from the debates is a slap in the face of that large mass of Oregon voters out there who have become disenchanted with the 2 major political parties and their candidates.
The 3 candidates held their own debate, but it did not receive the press coverage that the Kulongoski-Saxton debate received. So what do you think? Do you think the debate for Oregon's governor race should include all the candidates? You can log on to our website at KOIN.com and take our web poll on that question. And we'll show you the results coming up tonight on KOIN News 6 at 11 o'clock. The three minor party candidates
and Republican Ron Saxton. They're the only candidates you'll see and hear in the governor's race debates. But the three minor party candidates say that simply is not fair. Mary Sterritt, Joe Keating, and Richard Morley held a news conference today pushing for inclusion in those debates. They say the big box candidates lock on the process hurts them, the people of Oregon, and it hurts democracy itself.
So to pretend that we have free and fair elections in this state, if we specifically limit political discourse, should be a very strong warning to all the voters in Oregon.
So the three minor party candidates say including their diverse opinions is essential to giving Oregonians a chance to make informed choices at the polls. And here's your chance to weigh in. Do you think the debate for the governor's race should include all qualified candidates? Log on to the and Republican Ron Saxton.
That's running for Oregon governor have teamed up to deliver a message. They want to be included in the debates for governor. The Libertarian, Pacific Green, and Constitution Party candidates sent a letter to debate sponsors to express their views. The three candidates partially blame Republican Ron Saxton and Democratic Governor Ted Kulongoski for keeping them out of the debates. Both campaigns say they have nothing to do with who's invited. K2 political analyst Tim Hibbett says it's common for major party candidates to snub debate invitations if third-party candidates are invited.
It is going to be a warm evening again. Let's take a look outside right now. We can see where third-party candidates are joining forces for a common cause. They're demanding to be included in the debates for governor. The Libertarian, Pacific Green, and Constitution Party candidates sent a letter to debate sponsors saying they should be invited. The candidates partially blame Republican Ron Saxton and Democratic Governor Ted Kulongoski for keeping them out of the debates.
There has been a choreographed effort to limit what Oregon voters will hear.
This is not a game, unfortunately, that's conducted necessarily for the benefit of the public. It's a game that is conducted for the benefit of the two major party candidates.
Hibbett says it's common for major party candidates to deny debate invitations if third-party candidates are involved. Both the Saxton and Kulongoski campaigns say they have nothing to do with who is invited.
New at 11.
I win this championship. I want to see my teammate win. And
three parties, three people seeking the governorship of Oregon without the money and machinery of a major political party.
From Northwest News Channel 8, where the news comes first, this is Viewpoint.
And thanks for joining us here on Viewpoint. I'm Russ Lewis. We're pleased that our public affairs program is back on the air here for the next 6 weeks during the election season. And we're going to get it going today with a bang. We're going to hear from the alternative candidates running for governor of Oregon. We're pleased that all three could join us today. Joe Keating of the Pacific Green Party is here, Richard Morley of the Libertarian Party, and Mary Sterritt from the Constitution Party. Welcome all. Joining us to question the candidates today, News Channel 8 reporter Vince Patton is here, along with the Oregonians' Harry Esteve. Guys, thanks again. Old veterans of the Viewpoint show. We're glad to be back. Let's just start this off for the folks who are just either starting to pay attention to this campaign here as we approach October, or they're paying attention to the, I think you call them the big box candidates, right? They maybe haven't seen or heard of you three yet or what you're all about. I want to start with you, Mr. Keating. Just tell us 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Why did you get into this race as a minor party candidate? Clearly an uphill battle. Why would you do that?
Well, my prism that I look at is doing what is right for Oregon. And this state is in trouble. The current power structure with the big box candidates, that whole thing is not working. And my opportunity to bring green economics into the state and be a leader is my motivation.
Mr. Morley? 2 years ago, I ran for Secretary of State, appointed by the Libertarian Party as their candidate, and I had some success in that run, and the party unanimously twisted my arm to be their candidate for governor this year. I have a financial background. I'm the only one of the 5 candidates who has a financial background, and the state has some very serious financial/fiscal issues to deal with, and I think I'm the right candidate to win the governorship and deal with those issues.
Mary Sterrett?
Russ, well, you know, when I started to look around at what choices were available, I realized when I coined the term big box candidates that we really had little choice, that those who were interested in a real conservative choice for governor couldn't look to Ron Saxton and certainly couldn't look to the governor. So what I saw was a melding, a merge, a mind merge, for instance, as the Oregonian called it, a mind meld. There really seemed to be a morphing of the two parties. And then what I wanted to do was to offer voters a conservative choice.
Okay, we'll start it off. Vince, you have a question?
Let me pick up right on that theme. You say Saxton is not conservative. He maintains that he's conservative, and many observers thought that he was running a very conservative race in the primary, perhaps less so now. What makes Ron Saxton not a conservative?
I'll tell you why, Vince, because if you look at what happened during the primary, the strategy there was to be conservative, to get the base. And then there was going to be a veering left during the general election, which we have seen. We have seen, when you look at who Ron Saxton has supported in the past, liberal Democrats, liberal causes, from Earl Blumenauer to Ron Wyden to Ginny Burdick, anti-Second Amendment Oregon senator. We look at whoever he has supported, and for instance, he even supported Ted Kulongoski when he ran for Attorney General. So when you want to get a definition of who someone is, look at who they supported. I don't see any reference to him having supported a Republican candidate or cause or a conservative cause throughout his political life. Now, when you look at what he's done now, for instance, on the life issue, that's not in line with the Republican platform. He's a pro-abortion candidate. He's not in line fiscally with the Republicans. If you look at his stance on Measure 48, which is a spending cap he wants nothing to do with, and he used the term, I am not following the Republican agenda, I have my own agenda. That tells us everything we need to know.
Well, how about on the other side of the coin, Joe, you're running with the Pacific Green Party, which is an environmentally based party. Has Governor Kulongoski not been a green enough governor?
Governor Kulongoski got green in the last 4 months, okay, and I think my candidacy had something to do with that. His track record for the first 3.5 years of his tenure was abysmal in terms of the environment. I could give you a couple of examples. One right here in Portland, the DEQ, working with the governor and the Port of Portland, planned to put an open toxic dump site within 20 yards of the river. It's called T4 Slip 3. It's insane. It's on a fault line in terms of earthquakes, but it's something that is an environmental mistake. You don't put an open toxic dump site within 20 yards of the river that you're taking the toxic material from. And it goes on and on.
What are two environmental programs that you would bring on as soon as you were elected governor that haven't been brought on now?
Well, my main thrust, or one of the main pillars of the campaign, is looking at an energy independent Oregon. I look at partnering with the existing universities in terms of cutting-edge technology. I look for expanded use of public utility districts wherever possible. For example, here in Portland, I would support the city's takeover of PGE and work with the city in terms of trying to accomplish that. But then on a very hands-on basis, and this is where you have to start, okay? You have to start smart and you have to start small. And we're going to be starting in rural Oregon, and we're setting up, or the vision is to set up rural centers that have biodiesel availability that is made right there. It has a mix of solar and wind and whatever other areas that, like biomass if it's appropriate. And set up regional centers for individual communities of 4,000 to 5,000 people that they are totally off the grid and make it work.
Mr. Morley, I'm curious what you see are the holes in the existing power structure, which are clearly dominated by Democrats and Republicans.
Well, I think I mentioned fiscal issues, and the Oregonian had a piece recently in the front page of the Sunday Oregonian by Betsy Hammond about the fiscal crisis that this state is in. And I think the public in general is not aware of this. And I hope that everybody read that article or will read that article, because it's frightening.
Everybody hears the revenues are up, things are looking good.
Well, revenues are up temporarily, but look, the state has debt. You remember we passed this bond issue to bail out the agencies in government who had not paid their debt to PERS, so now we taxpayers are on the hook for that. We've got a real instability in our tax revenue situation. We've got income tax, which, yes, looks good right now, but give us a slight recession, and that's going to go down. And who's going to get hurt? The schools, because schools are the last thing to be budgeted. And after the legislature budgets for all the other agencies and programs that they've special interests have pushed for, then maybe if there's anything left, it'll go to schools, and the schools are going to get hurt. My campaign says, let's fund schools first. Fund schools first. And the other priority for government is public safety. That's one thing government really needs to do, is to protect us. And so we want to see the legislature fund those two things first. And that means bringing OSP, the Oregon State Police, up to full staff. We need to get that done. I think everybody agrees on that. So fund schools first and fund public safety. If we don't do those things, we're going to continue to have serious trouble.
And I think we can spend some time on this with all the candidates, talking about fiscally what we do in this state and how we get the money we're talking about, right? We've heard from Ron Saxton and Ted Kulingoski, hey, here's what we're going to be doing when we're elected. You just brought up some things. Let's talk to all three of you about the way we, take money from the taxpayers in this state and how we spend it. Should we, Mary, reform the system? Is income tax, reliance on that and property taxes, is that the way to do it, or should we do something else?
Well, we are one of the only states that has that complete reliance, and that is a very, as Richard pointed out, that is a very tenuous situation to be in economically.
As we found out in the last few years.
As we have found out, and all we need is another blip, and we are going to have some serious problems.
So what do we do?
What I suggest is we take a look at, instead of the conventional wisdom is we need to throw more money after these things, but take a look at, for instance, that half of the state's land is owned by the federal government, which means it can't be taxed per federal law. So if we were to take all that land, sell it to private interests, we would come up with almost $4 billion. $4 billion that could then be used for the schools that we seem to never have enough money for.
But if it's federal land, it's not ours to sell.
Exactly. Why does the federal government own half the land in the state of Oregon? That's one question I don't hear anybody asking. But that being said, if we were to bring our state employees up to the national average, or should I say down to the national average, because we have so many more of them, we would save $100 million. If you look at some of these advocacy groups like Native American advocacy groups and Hispanic and Asian and minority and all of these advocacy groups that, if you look at the Oregon Constitution, it says that no one group should get anything that another group is not privy to. So if we take all the money that's being used for these advocacy groups, why not we would save another $1 million.
But that's $1 million out of an $11 billion general fund budget.
Exactly.
I mean, where are you looking any bigger than that?
You see, whenever someone says it's just $1 million, I want to ask if we were to take that and apportion it to each taxpayer, what we would be looking at. And just $1 million, if spent wisely, can really save an awful lot of problems. If you look at, for instance, what we're spending on the Department of Human Services, right now, today, the Department of Human Services can put their finger on almost $5 million of taxpayer money that has been absconded with by welfare cheats. But it's politically incorrect to point to the fact that people are using taxpayer money to cheat the welfare system. So let us take a look at that, clean up what we have, we'll save an awful lot of money.
Richard, you said you'd like to see schools funded first and public safety, and then whatever's left over gets spent elsewhere. Are there certain areas of government that you would just soon not receive any funding in order to pay for schools and public safety?
Well, I'm not ready to say specifically what would not receive anything, but I'll tell you this, one part of my four-part financial plan, the final part is to put experts into the agencies and programs in state governments. These are management experts. I'm not talking about just auditors, professional auditors like myself, but people who have advanced degrees in management, who have experience, engineers, put them out into these agencies and we'll find places to save money. I know it's going to happen. Mary mentioned the Department of Human Services. The article by Betsy Hammond said that the Department of Human Services has per capita double the number of employees as the national average. Why is that? Why is Oregon so fat with people in the DHS? And the Department of Administrative Services is another huge agency that needs to be looked at. We need to put experts in there to find ways to save money. That's where we're going to fund schools. That's where we're going to fund public safety and all the other things without raising taxes. But taxes are an issue. I propose something that is heresy in Oregon. But let me preface my proposal by saying I would abolish the income tax. I would abolish the personal income tax. I would abolish the corporate income tax. Corporations, a lot of them only pay $10 anyway. I mean, why keep that? And instead, let's replace all that income tax. Let's put in a consumption tax. The consumption tax is generally referred to as a sales tax. I know people don't like it. I voted against the sales tax 9 times myself, but I voted against it because no one ever suggested that we would cancel or eliminate any other tax. I'm saying eliminate the income tax in Oregon and go to a consumption tax. Everybody will pay it. The criminals, the underground people, the visitors to our state, everybody will pay that income tax. Now, people say it's not fair for the poor, but I would exempt some basic necessities of life from that tax so that the poor aren't hurt any more than anyone else.
Joe Keating, can you get behind that? You favor a sales tax if something's abolished, or as a third tax?
Well, no, I take a slightly different approach. Okay, the whole question to me in terms of taxes, okay, can't be just say, well, do this tax or that tax or this tax over here. There has to be a new sense of community that is built before we get anywhere with major tax changes. What I think we have to do is get a hold of the kicker and set up a reserve in the state so we can normalize our projections and our growth projections and our expense projections. At the same time that happens, you got to go into Salem and break the gridlock there. You have to have a plan to do that. And then you have to go out and identify fresh new sources of revenue that can be applied to the various situations that we have, education, health, you name it, and to be able to apply fresh revenues judiciously, okay, in a better environment to move things forward, because nothing's moving forward.
And we have to take a break here, but let me nail you two down first before we go. Sales tax under any circumstances, yes or no?
You know, a generic sales tax is a loaded question, and it may be appropriate at some point. I don't think it's appropriate now, okay, in any way, shape, or form.
Mary?
Sales tax, yes, if the income tax goes. It's
one for the other.
One for the quid pro quo.
Okay.
Good, I got one vote for that.
I think she may be voting for somebody else. I'm not sure. We'll ask her that one. We're going to take a break with our alternative candidates for governor of Oregon when we come back.
The creative candidates.
That's funny.
Welcome back to Viewpoint, everybody. We're talking with our creative candidates for governor of Oregon, as they like to call themselves. And we have a question now from the Oregonians, Harry Esteve.
Well, Richard, you talked a little bit about funding schools first, but I'd like to hear from all three of you, or at least the other two, on the issue of schools. Basically, do you believe that schools are getting enough money now, or do you think that more money above and beyond inflation and population needs to be pumped into our public school system to make them better? Joe or Mary, take it.
Go ahead, Joe.
I seriously think the schools need more money. I seriously think that the schools right now are being put under an incredible amount of stress to meet false and goals in terms of testing, etc., that takes away from the holistic child. And I think there's a combination that has to take place in our school, an overall type of situation where, yes, fresh monies are needed, and they are needed badly. And then on the other side, we have to look at how are we going to rejuvenate the education of the whole kid, the ability to learn and to grow up in a world that has lots of choices and different things.
But just real quickly, where would you find that money, and what would you not fund if you weren't able to get extra revenue?
I don't have a plan that says if I find this money, it's going to go here. We have an overall fiscal package, which we're calling the cha-ching plan. Every time we find a net revenue gain for the state based upon one of our plans, we put a cha-ching next to it. Right now, we're up to about $750 million plus. It's a combination of tax increases for cigarette taxes, which I agree with Kulingowski on. It's also taking a fresh look at the bottle bill, looking at the ability of generating more revenue from the state with the bottle bill. It's a matter of solving the kicker problem and in a way that is positive and quick, etc.
Let's go to Mary.
The government schools are a monopoly. They are an extremely bloated monopoly that is not good for the consumer. The consumer is the child, and the consumer, no matter how bad the schools are, they have to show up every September. We are on course now. We could ultimately, at the rate of education funding, we could wind up spending more than all the state revenue together. I believe it is counterintuitive to believe that more money is going to fix the problem. That is not the problem. We have a situation here where we are funding programs, we are funding things. Every year we ask, we've got to have another increase. Nobody wants to ask where the money's gone for last time's increase. Let's take a look at the fact that the new money usually goes to fund old programs which don't work. If they're ineffective, why throw more money, good money, after programs that don't work? Let's take what money we do have, use effective, innovative programs, let the money follow the student, take the control from the school, the state-owned district, have it go back to the parents and the school boards, and let the parents make the decisions, let the kids go where they're going to learn
So
best.
vouchers for private schools or homeschooling?
Well, I think that what we need to do is we need to look at the fact that government education is not working. It's costing a lot of money. We can do it on a whole lot less. We need to be very creative. We need to have tax credits for those who send their kids to other schools.
But I'm asking you to be more specific. Where would the money go when you say alternative?
The alternative is that we do not have to have the model we have for government education now. It is not working. We can do it on a whole lot less, and that would include tax credits, vouchers, charter schools, getting some competition in the school system, because there is no competition now.
I would agree with Mary about the competition. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently that suggested that there was a trend starting in the eastern United States where affluent families are taking their kids out of private schools and putting them into public schools. Part of it is that the private schools have become very expensive, but I think they knew that going in, that relatively that was going to be expensive. I think what's happened is that the competition from the private schools has made the public schools better. They have improved. That kind of competition is healthy in schools. And when we're talking schools, when I talk about funding education, I'm talking about everything from preschool, from pre-kindergarten, all the way through the university systems. Now, public schools are part of our culture, and they're going to stay. But as Mary has suggested, there are alternatives, and those alternatives need to be dealt with too, and I think vouchers is a good idea. I think as far as where we need money, we certainly need it in the advanced education. We need it in the colleges and universities around the state. They've taken a horrible hit. We also need some places in the K-12 system, we need to beef it up with more funding. That funding should not come from more taxes. I dislike Mr. Kulingowski constantly trying to apply more taxes. I, as an audit manager, I was an audit manager in the Division of Audits back in the 80s, and when I went in and did performance audits, I found lots of opportunity to save money. And I've proposed, since I ran for Secretary of State and again now, let's put experts into the school system and find ways to make the schools more efficient. We can cut out tons of spending in the administrative areas, particularly of schools, and save that money and get it into the classroom and reduce classroom size.
I understand all three of you agree on the Iraq War. You oppose the war in many areas, and you oppose having Oregon National Guard troops there. What would you do about it? It's really the president who has taken those troops there. I know you oppose their presence there, but what can the governor really do?
What I like to say is, let us, if we are a nation of laws, let us follow those laws. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution makes it very clear under what circumstances we can call forth the militia. The governor is the commander-in-chief of the Oregon National Guard. Do you know that today we not only have the Guard in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they have been deployed since the middle of August, Battalion B out of Corvallis, to Mongolia. And I ask you why our boys and our toys are going to Mongolia. We are using these men and women and our equipment illegally. There has not been a lawful order to deploy the troops. Article 5, Section 9 of the Oregon Constitution says there are 3 circumstances under which you can deploy the Guard within the state. None of them call for the Guard to be deployed outside the country. And I would say that this is a very serious problem, and if I were governor, the Oregon National Guard would come home.
Mr. Morley?
Very short statement. As governor, I will do everything in my power to keep the Oregon National Guard out of foreign conflicts.
I have an approach that's similar to Mary's, but a little different. I think it was 1986, the governor of Minnesota challenged the right to, he didn't want to send his troops to Costa Rica for the drug wars. And so he said no. And that went to Congress, okay, and caused a little stir. And they passed a Montgomery Amendment, which essentially established federal jurisdiction or federal rights over state rights in terms of deployment of National Guard troops. That was then challenged into the Supreme Court by the governor of Minnesota. And the Supreme Court said that the Montgomery Amendment, it verified federal jurisdiction, but it did say that if there was an impending emergency in the state, or if the training of the National Guard troops were impaired by the deployment, then there'd be a case to be made for piercing the Montgomery Amendment. And so that's the approach I'd take. I would say no. It would be challenged right on up to the Supreme Court. In the meantime, while I'm doing that, I'd be going out talking to some of the other friendly governors who might see eye to eye on this and get something going.
Let me just ask the 3 of you, what, in the last 4 years, what's the most egregious thing that has or hasn't happened coming out of the governor's office in this state? Is there one thing that's happened or hasn't happened that really fires you up over Ted Kulingoski's term? One thing he's done?
I don't know. I don't really know where to begin.
You have to pick one thing.
It's really tough.
Is there one thing that really upsets you?
I think what I've seen overall, and I'll just sort of make it a broad statement here, is that the governor seems to deflect the will of the people, whether it's through executive order, whether it's turning around and doing or saying and having a sentiment against what the voters have already suggested that they wanted to see happen, and that is not good governance, I don't think.
I can't give you a specific item, but I'll tell you, like Mary said, in general, the problem I have with Mr. Kulingoski, he seems like a nice gentleman, but I don't think Mr. Kulingoski is much of a leader. And what we need is leadership in Salem, because if we don't have it, the people are going to continue to resort to the initiative, the ballot initiative, in order to make law changes in this state and to make their will felt. And until we can get a strong leader, a Tom McCall kind of person, if you like, who can really take hold of the reins of the government in Salem and work carefully with the leaders of the legislature to get things done and regain the faith of the public.
That's an easy statement to make. He's not a leader. Just cite an example of failure of leadership.
Make it fast.
Yeah, gotta be quick.
Look, everything is, let's add more tax. Let's just tax. We're going to add an insurance tax now. I mean,
that's not leadership in your
opinion.
opinion.
Well, I don't think it. Well, it can be leadership if the people are in favor of more tax. But I think there are other alternatives.
We have 20 seconds. Joe, go ahead.
20 seconds.
Yep. Yes.
One major accomplishment. I think he developed the art of invisibility.
Didn't do enough.
Major letdown in my eyes was complete lack of leadership during the early phases and the important phases in terms of the protection of our forest lands in the state, namely the Biscuit Fire. Thanks.
Okay, we need to go. Thanks very much for joining us. Joe Keating, Richard Morley, Mary Sterrett, good luck in November. We're about 5-6 weeks away. Thanks for joining us, guys. Remember, Viewpoint, you can catch it Sunday nights on Northwest Cable News at 8:30. That's cable channel 49 on most systems. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Hey,
Everybody wants me.
It's Outlook Portland with Nick Fish, tackling today's affect Portland and the surrounding area. Brought to you by Azumano Travel.
Welcome back to Outlook Portland. My guest this morning is Richard Morley. He is a candidate for governor of the Libertarian Party of Oregon. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
As I was doing my research for this show, I was struck by the following. You appeared to be to the left of Ted Kulongoski on social issues and to the right of Ron Saxton on tax and spending issues. So it begs the question for me, what is a libertarian?
Well, libertarian is a nice combination of those two features. We tend to be fiscally conservative and hold government responsible for how it spends our money and hold individuals responsible for taking care of themselves. We also like to give people choice, and therefore we are very socially liberal and socially tolerant, we sometimes call it, and we support a lot of social positions that are rather liberal.
How did you come to the Libertarian Party?
Well, I was invited to join the Libertarians in a campaign against a bond measure some years ago because of my financial background. And while I learned about libertarianism, I visited the Libertarian office in Beaverton. I had never been there before. And sitting at a desk, I looked up on the wall and there was a banner up there and it said, "Libertarians stand for individual freedom and personal responsibility." And it grabbed me. And ever since I've been a Libertarian, my wife joined the Libertarians and we're glad to be there.
Now let's talk about the party. How many members do you have statewide?
16,000, give or take.
And are there libertarians that occupy elected positions throughout the state?
Yeah, well, throughout the state, but not at the state level. So far, no third-party candidate of any third party has won a statewide office. We have a lot of libertarians in local offices, regional offices, water boards, city councils, school boards, and a lot of other smaller government agencies, but not at the state level. We don't have a statewide candidate yet.
Richard, the question I ask everybody who sits in this chair who's running for office is very simple and straightforward. Why are you running for governor, and why do you think you're better than the other candidates?
Well, I'm running for governor because the Libertarians twisted my arm and said, "You are our best candidate. You just ran a very good race for Secretary of State in 2004. I had 5 newspaper endorsements, and even the Oregonian, which didn't endorse me, said that if Life Were Fair voters would choose Richard Morley to be Oregon's next Secretary of State." I received 57,000 votes. I thought it was a pretty good number. It wasn't enough to win the election. The Libertarians then grabbed my arm, gave it a sharp twist, and said, "You got to be our candidate for governor." And reluctantly, because I'm kind of in a retirement mode, my wife tells me, I agreed. And now I am energized by this campaign. There is so much to be done, and I'm the guy that has the expertise to do it.
Well, let's talk about that. One of your opponents, Ted Kulongoski, has held just about every position you can hold in state government. Mr. Saxton has a former school board chair. What do you point to as the key qualifications in your background for this position?
Well, first of all, I'm not a government person that's been there and hasn't done anything else. I have had quite a variety of experience in my life, most of it in the private sector, and about 6 years in government. And so I've got a wide background. I'm a certified internal auditor, now retired. I have a master's degree in business administration from the University of California, Berkeley, where I graduated in the top 5% of my class. I have a strong financial background. Oregon is facing strong financial problems. I'm the best candidate. The other 4 are 2 lawyers and 2 political activists. I'm a financial guy, and I can get done the things that need to be done. I'm also a leader. I've been a leader in the private sector up to the vice president level in corporations and in government jobs as manager. I was the first performance audits manager in the state of Oregon.
Now, you weren't born in Oregon, which, as another transplant, I won't hold against you. But what brought you to Oregon?
Well, as I say, I couldn't help where my mother was when I was born, and it was that big state down south. You know, I had the opportunity. I came to Oregon earlier, and my wife and I visited Oregon, and we loved this state. We always vacationed up here, and we just loved it. And back in 1978, I had the opportunity to come here and be vice president of a small company that a friend of mine was building. It was growing very rapidly, and he asked me to come and be his vice president. And I jumped at the chance. And Joan and I moved to Tigard, and we've lived there for 29 years now. That's how we came to the state.
Richard, some recent polling data indicates that for the first time in American history, a majority of Americans don't believe that their children will have as good a life as they had, which is an incredible event, a credible change of circumstances. And later on in the show, we're going to talk about your plan for Oregon's future and your views on the issues. But in a nutshell, where do you think that's coming from?
I think it's real. I think I'm concerned, too, about my grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren. I'm concerned about their future. I mean, not only do we look at international threats, the threats of terrorism, of the possession of nuclear weapons by wild and crazy countries. Those are scary, but I think even locally we've got some real problems. The environment deterioration is a problem. The excessive population is a problem. We've got to control these issues. We've got to be smarter about how we run things. We've got to help people help themselves more. There are too many people now that have become dependent on government instead of taking care of themselves. And as we go further that way, we're moving towards socialism and even communism. It's horrible.
Does it concern you as a candidate as you go around the state at how little the public seems to understand and know about their state government and how it works?
Yes, I think so, but you realize that they get their news from the newspaper and media like yours, and that's often realistic, but often it's slanted toward maybe the more sensational, and maybe they don't have the time to study and really see what's going on, and they've lost faith in their government. They've lost faith. When they hear about these legislators sitting on the beach in Maui, being wined and dined by the beer and wine distributing industry, and those people then are gaining great advantage from the legislatures, our people just don't trust them. They don't trust the administration. They don't trust they don't trust the legislature. So what do? They put these these ballot measures in, and the people start running the government. This is not a good way to go.
Richard, in the next segment, we're going to give you a chance to talk about your financial plan for Oregon in some detail. But for people out there who are watching this and want to know more about you, tell us about your website and where they can get information.
I have a website, www.morley06.com. Morley, M-O-R-L-E-Y, 06.com. There you can see my voters pamphlet page. You can see my biography. You can see all the issues and my positions on them. I hope you'll tune in.
We'll put that up on the web on the screen so people can access it. And again, when we come back, we'll talk about your plan for Oregon. This is Outlook Portland. Please stay tuned.
Outlook Portland with Nick Fish is brought to you by Azumano Travel. Call or visit the Azumano location nearest you for your next vacation.
My guest this morning is Richard Morley, the Libertarian Party of Oregon candidate for governor. Richard, you have something called for Oregon. Tell us about it.
Oregon is facing some serious financial issues. We've got some problems. We've got a debt that we voted in with a bond issue a few years back, so we've got that huge debt. We've got a reliance on a yo-yo tax, the income tax that's applied to individuals and to corporations and other businesses. We have no savings. We have no way to smooth out the bad years and the good years, and so we go up and down. We don't take care of schools first. The schools never know what they're going to get. It's really a dismal situation. We're headed down the road towards state bankruptcy or perhaps total socialism in this state. I don't think the voters want either one of those. I have a four-part plan for resolving these issues. The first thing is fund schools first, fund education first. Fund education, and that means all the way from pre-K up through the university system, and all kinds of education, not just the public schools, but private schools and charter schools and homeschooling, all of that. Anything that's legal as education, fund that first. The budget now budgets to fund other areas before it ever gets to education. The big bloated state agencies get their money first and other state programs, and finally they fund schools last. I would fund the two primary functions of government first in Oregon, fund education and public safety. Public safety includes bringing the OSP, the Oregon State Police, up to full staff. So that's my number one objective in this campaign. That's my main focus. Number two, we need to change our tax system. Right now, this yo-yo income tax, it's really good in a year like this year, and tax revenues go up. But in bad years, tax revenues go down, and suddenly people are scurrying to try to find enough funds to fund everything.
And don't take your word on this. The Wall Street keeps telling us in our bond ratings that with our unstable tax and income structure, we actually have to pay more interest on our debt because our rating is a little lower.
So we shoot ourselves in the foot here with what we have. Not only do we have problems with the way we run things, but we're being rewarded negatively by the financial markets, and so we have to pay more money to borrow if we have to do that. So what I propose is I'm going to touch the third rail of politics here. Some people aren't going to like this, but hear me out, please. Let's abolish the income tax. Let's abolish the personal income tax. Let's abolish the corporate/business income tax. Get rid of them entirely. And let's put in their place a revenue neutral, that means no more, no less tax, a revenue neutral consumption tax. Now, that means sales tax. Sales tax. And some people say, oh, well, that's going to hurt the poor because they're going to pay a proportionately greater amount. I said, no, no, wait a minute. We're going to exempt certain items, the basics of living, you know, food you buy at the store to feed your family, shelter, public transportation, health care. Let's leave those out. Everything else is a choice. And remember, I'm pro-choice. Right. So if people want to buy a flat-screen TV or a new car, let them pony up some money into government.
Now,
That's the second point.
This is not a particularly radical idea because it is, in effect, the law of the state of Washington.
It works in Washington, and it works in many other states. It is not unusual. People are used to seeing this sort of thing. It will be a transition issue. We will have some problems anytime we make a change. But this is a healthy change for Oregon. And it's going to put Oregon on a much smoother path in terms of its revenue flow.
All right, Richard, we have schools first. We have a fundamental change in our tax system. Right. What's 3 and 4 on your list?
3 and 4. 3 is the kicker. The kicker's been calculated, and I'm sure that your viewers know what the kicker is. It's been calculated. Let's distribute it. Let's not let the governor reach in and grab it and steal it away from the people or the companies that have paid in that excess revenue. So let's go ahead and pay that out. But we don't need a kicker. You know why we have a kicker? Because the state economists missed their budget estimate by $2.2 billion. That's unconscionable. If I had done that in graduate school, I'd have flunked out. Right. So out of $11.6 billion general fund, they missed it $2.2 billion. If they tell me they can't budget 2 years out with more accuracy than that, I say let's not. Let's go 1 year out, and maybe we'll even bring the legislature into an annual session.
So you're for eliminating the kicker, but also setting up a rainy day fund?
I am. Any difference there is between the revenues that come in and the estimate goes into, I don't call it a rainy day fund. We accountants call it a reserve fund. Okay. I'll call it a savings account. Let's settle on that. We'll put that money in a savings account this year because we have more revenue than we estimated. Next year, if we have less revenue, let's reach in and take that same amount, that shortage, out of that fund. The only other thing I would use that fund for is catastrophic emergencies, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, so forth. But let's control that by budgeting a minimum amount in the fund each year. When it gets up to a maximum amount, let's cut tax rates.
30 seconds left in this segment. What's point 4?
The fourth one is I'm going to put experts into all state agencies to find ways to save money. I'm a performance auditor, but performance auditing is a good function, but it costs a lot of money. I'm going to take people with master's degrees in business or public administration, engineering, and so forth, put them in as teams, and they're going to go into state agencies, and they're going to come back and report to the governor's office the opportunities to cut out programs, to streamline programs, to make programs more efficient, and to save a ton of money. You know that the Department of Human Services, one of the largest state agencies, has twice the number of employees per capita as the national average. We got to find out why, and maybe we can cut some things out.
Richard, we've come to the end of this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about some current issues facing Oregon, including some ballot measures. This is Outlook Portland. Please stay tuned.
Outlook Portland with Nick Fish is brought to you by Azumado Travel.
Welcome back to Outlook Portland. My guest this morning is Richard Morley. He's a candidate for governor. Richard, we're going to call this Short Takes.
Okay.
There's so many issues facing the voters this November and controversial things out there. I want to give you a chance to tell us, what you're for and against and why, and as briefly as possible. Let's start with Measure 48, which is the so-called spending cap measure. It's quite controversial. Neither of the two, what you call big box candidates, are in favor of it. Where do you come out?
I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of limiting spending for government generally. And that's not just applicable to Oregon, but anywhere. Generally, I think government needs to be constrained in terms of its spending because government has historically gone the other way. And it has just expanded and expanded and expanded, become more bloated and more inefficient. And it's time to rein it in. And we can do that in a healthy manner in Oregon.
Measure 43 deals with so-called parental notification for minors 15 to 17. Again, it's pretty controversial. Where do you come out on that?
I oppose it. I oppose it. I'm really concerned. Look, I have 2 daughters and I have 3 granddaughters among my 5 grandchildren. I'm very sensitive to this issue in terms of young women. But I am really concerned that we will drive young women into back alley abortion clinics and we're endangering their health. And there are a lot of times when the conditions at home are such that it would be detrimental to that young woman to have to make the notice. I think we got to rely on the professionals, the professional medical
Let the doctor.
people. Yeah.
Let the doctor, not an administrative law judge,
some advice.
Decide what's in the best interest of the minor. You've taken a pretty strong position on the Oregon National Guard, which you think is in its mission now in Iraq is outside of its core mission. Tell us about that.
Nick, I have one simple statement I want to make. As governor, I will do everything in my power to keep the Oregon National Guard out of foreign conflicts. Simply stated, that's my position.
Mary Sterritt was on the show a couple weeks ago, and she said a similar thing. Do you go so far as she does to say that the deployment of Oregon National Guards men and women abroad is actually a violation of the law?
No, I'm not prepared to make that statement. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an accountant. I'm a financial guy, an auditor. I don't know if it's illegal or not. I think that would be for the Supreme Court to decide. Look, Nick, every night when I see on television, on the Lair show, the names in silence of soldiers that have been killed, my wife and I stand up and salute each one of them. And my heart goes out. Those kids should not be murdered over there.
Global warming is in the headlines, and you know there's some people nationally, particularly in the religious right, who say that it doesn't exist. Mr. Saxton, the Republican candidate, says it's a problem, but the marketplace can take care of it. Where do you come down on global warming?
Well, I'm closer to Saxton than I am the other argument. I think global warming has a human component. The human component, though, is beyond what most people realize. I have something I call TDMP. My grandkids all know what TDMP is. It's too darn many people. And if we don't attend to the issues of population, global warming is going to continue. Pollution of the planet is going to continue. Look, I'm a fly fisherman. I love to get out and on the streams and lakes and rivers, and I just hate it when I see trash along there. I see the air brown down in that state I used to live in. I see a lot of things that tell me that people are doing some bad things to the environment. I think we've got to deal with the population issues, and you say, how can we do that here? How can I do it as governor? I would wind back on this economic development that we're paying for with state funds. We use state funds and lottery funds to promote economic development. I would say get the state out of that, let economic development happen in the marketplace naturally, and maybe we won't so quickly bring all these people from outside the state and outside the country, outside the nation, into Oregon, into the girdle-wrapped urban growth boundary that we live in here. And pollute the roads and the streams and the air, et cetera.
We're coming to the end of this segment. As governor, will you sign a bill authorizing, legalizing civil unions in the state of Oregon?
Absolutely. Look, the government has no business in marriage. It's not the government's business to tell you or me whom we can marry or not marry. The government, for its legal purposes that are already set in law, can recognize civil unions for any couple, any two adults that come to the government and ask for one.
I'll cut you off there. We'll pick it up during the break. This is Outlook Portland. Be right back.
Outlook Portland with Nick Fish is brought to you by Azumano Travel.
Welcome back to Outlook Portland and my guest, Richard Morley. Okay, let's talk about Richard Morley, the man, not the candidate. Okay. You're married and you have 3 kids.
Right. I've been married to my wife, Joan, for 33 years. I have 3 kids. They are by a previous marriage. Joan and I don't have children of our own. But I have 3 kids and 5 grandchildren.
Any of your kids or grandchildren thinking about politics as a future?
Not as far as I know. I don't think so. My son's an executive with a large industrial electronics company. I have a daughter who is a stockbroker, a vice president of her firm, and another daughter who works for Walmart.
Terrific. On some website I looked at, it listed as your religion, quote, my own. Your religion is your business, but I'm curious, what is your faith?
Well, I was raised as a Baptist, and but my faith is really not connected with any organized religion. I'll tell you when I feel closest to a great deity, and that's when I'm out in the woods, I'm out in nature, and I look around me at things natural, and it's awesome for me.
Richard, if you fall a little short in this race and don't get to your goal of being elected the next governor, what's the next big challenge for you?
Retirement. My wife told me that I retired back in 2001, but somehow she's wondering where I am when we're ready to go on these retirement trips.
It's a heck of a way to spend your retirement.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, we're at the point of the show, my favorite part of the show. It's called the 2-minute drill. And we're going to ask you some short answer questions. We have a no filibuster rule. And again, it's a chance for the audience to get to know you as the person. Let's start with a softball. Who's your favorite president and why?
Ronald Reagan, I think. I admire the man. First of all, he was older than I am today when he assumed the presidency, so don't let my age bother anybody. I think he was a man with a huge heart, and so I admire him highly.
You are in favor of term limits for legislators. What's a card-carrying libertarian doing, supporting something like term limits?
It's a concession to reality. Yeah, libertarians don't believe in free choice, so people should make
the marketplace
choice. Yeah, that's the marketplace. So the people should be able to choose whom they want. If they choose the same person 20 times in a row, so be it. That's philosophically where I come down. The reality of it is that in Salem particularly, the system is geared for protecting the incumbent. There are all kinds of protections that would take me a long time to describe. And because of the awareness of that reality, I think there is a time limit on these people. They're like fish, and after 3 days,
I beg your pardon.
They begin to. Oh, excuse me.
Okay,
My apology.
We'll let that pass. What's the last book you read?
I read a book called Flyboys. It's written by James Bradley, the same author who wrote Flags of Our Fathers, a movie that's coming out this week. It's a story of Chichijima during World War II, and it's a horrendous story called Flyboys.
You're king for a day in Oregon. You can do anything you want. What's number one on your list?
Oh my goodness, I can't come up with one thing. There's just so much to be done. I would change, I'll tell you what, I would change the lobbyists' effect on what goes on in Salem. I think that the special interests have wrapped their arms around Salem and are controlling it, and our legislature and even our administration is held captive by them.
Richard, we've come to the end of the show. What's your website if people want to get more information?
www.morley06.com. Morley06.com. That's MORLEY06.com. Please look at it.
We'll put that up on the website. I want to thank you for coming in and expressing your views on the current issues.
Mr. Fish. Yes,
I regret that the mainstream media and some of the organizations have shut you out from the debates because you obviously have a lot to say. But thanks for being here and good luck in November.
Thank you, Nick.
And thank you for joining me this morning on Outlook Portland. I'll see you next week.
Outlook Portland with Nick Fish was brought to you by Azumano Travel. Visit azumano.com for great